Takes Mondays to make Fridays. Rev, you and I debate music a lot. What does Meatloaf say? 2 out of 3 ain't bad?
Uh-huh.
So we got 2 out of 3 here. Jay Jordan had a family matter of which to take care of, and I guess he'll be with us next week. Mike Reichenbach, Phillip, Lowe are with us, Senator and Representative, respectfully. We'll go to the phone. Before we do that, I want to say somebody left this on. Somebody sent me a text yesterday. I talked to you a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a we touched on this story a couple of days ago. There's a young girl named Callie Weatherford who had a little issue with her eye, went to the eye doctor, thought they may need glasses, found out she has a highly aggressive brain tumor located on her brain stem. There's a lot of medical diagnosis here. I don't want to get into detail because I wouldn't understand it if I did. I got some medical terminology and verbiage here, but they're trying to raise money for the family. Friday, February 24, 11 through 7 at Hampton Lodge, 206 South McQueen Street, $10 per plate. They'll be serving chicken bog, barbecue, and all the fixings. You can dine in. You can drive through. Pickup is available. Delivery is available for 10 plates or more if your company would like a sign-up sheet. For more information or to make donations, you can contact, you ready? Trip Moore, 843-687-9289. Will Robinson, 843-468-1125. All of the money, every penny of the money will go to Callie and her family to help them negotiate an unimaginable, unfortunate event that I can't imagine going to bed at night knowing my 5-year-old has a aggressive brain tumor on the brain stem that is causing how much anxious and concern. I mean, I don't even like to, I mean, you got to think about it because it's real, but I don't like thinking about it. I actually got a call a couple of days ago. I told Rev about this. Huge Gamecock family. Mike and Phillip are Gamecocks. I'm a Gamecock. Huge Gamecock family. I reached out to a contact at the football office, and I think they're going to do some real kind things for the family to try to give a little hope and joy and optimism in a world that probably ain't very optimistic right now. But their world is in disarray. The house payment's still due. The rent, the car payment is still due. The groceries still have to be bought. Yeah, you put your life on just shut down, and she is the priority and should be, but the world keeps turning around us, and I think we can all do our part by supporting this fundraiser that will be once again Friday the 24th of February from 11 a.m. until 7 p.m., and I'm going to give those numbers again. Doesn't matter what it costs. Doesn't matter if it's $100 a plate. It's $10 per plate, but it doesn't matter. We're trying to raise money for a very, very worthy cause. Trip Moore, 843-687-9289. Will Robinson, 843-468-1125. I do believe that our audience has a very generous spirit and charitable heart, and I would ask you to support this family in their very desperate time. Do we have a call? Okay, let's go to the phone.
George, West Columbia. Morning, George. You're on the air.
Hey, good morning. I was calling in. I heard you say that the young people of today had no responsibility for the national debt, but I tend to disagree with you. I'm not saying Republicans haven't raised the debt some too, but Democrats have been especially bad about it. Every time they vote for Democrats, which most of the college students probably do, they're taking part in the national debt and they have some responsibility for it. If they voted for Joe Biden and the agenda that the Democrats have now, they certainly are responsible for it. They voted for Joe. They voted for illegal immigration. We spend about probably $30 billion or more a year on immigration. And since Biden took office, and when you think of all the thousands and thousands that have come into the country since then, you can imagine what we're spending on illegal immigration now when we're housing them in hotels and giving them 3 meals a day and money to spend and Lord knows what else. You could probably fund Social Security and Medicare with the money we're spending on that and money we spend on foreign aid to enemies of the country. There's a lot of ways we could cut back without hitting Social Security and Medicare. Not that it doesn't need some reform. In fact, in my opinion, I would just assume that they would phase out Medicare and Social Security and give the citizens the money back that they're putting into it and let them invest it themselves and take care of themselves. And I think we'd be a whole lot better off because the government is involved in way too many things. You need a marriage license to get married. You need a driver's license to drive. I mean, everywhere you turn, they're raising money and they're taxing us, double taxation in many ways. So that's all I've got to say.
That's a lot. That's all you got. That's a lot, man. That's a handful. You gave me an hour's worth of show material. I mean, I hear what he's saying about the young people voting Democrat. Democrats spend money more willingly than the Republicans. I'll give you a statistic. In the Biden in the Obama 8 years and the Biden 2 years, there's about $14 trillion of debt, net debt accumulated in those, that's 10 years. In the Bush 8 years and the Trump 4 years, there was about $12.7 trillion of federal debt accumulated. So for the Republicans to say we're better stewards of your money, by $1 trillion, 14 to 13 trillion. And the driver of the debt is Social Security, Medicare, defense, and now interest on debt. When some of the debt rolls off, some of the real cheap debt rolls off and gets refinanced at a newer and more expensive finance rate, our debt service will be north of $1 trillion. That's interest only. We're not paying principal. I mean, it's interest only. The interest only payment on our debt is in excess of $1 trillion a year. Our Social Security funding will be $1 trillion a year. Our Medicare funding, $1 trillion a year. Our defense spending is about $900 billion a year. So about 80% of all money that we send to Washington is kind of sort of on autopilot. I mean, I'll let Phillip and Mike address Medicaid because there's some matching they have to do. That's a big burden on the state budget. But I get the argument that young people are voting for Democrats, and Democrats seem to want bigger and more expansive government. But the Republicans have been not so good at curtailing or restraining themselves from the largesse of a federal government. I give these guys credit, and I'll talk to city and county council members. They do some things I don't like. They do some things I do like. But they have to tell people no, because money's a finite resource. The federal government has the ability to appropriate money they don't have because the Fed will buy that debt with money they don't have, and these two guys don't operate in that realm. Phillip, you want to jump in here? I mean, your ways and means. I mean, you know how hard it is to prioritize and appropriate.
I think one of the most important things is we have a balanced budget amendment. I mean, it's in our Constitution. It keeps us from being silly. Now, we could bond. I think our bonds are down to 1 or 2% of our total income. I mean, it's like nothing. That's truly what a credit card was used for, just for a quick in and out. But we always pay our debts off. The caller had a lot of good points, though. I really appreciated hearing that. And there is some buy-in from the younger generation. There are going to be some beneficiaries of things that have been spent for, but the most part, most of this money is going just hand to mouth. I mean, these people are using it. We're not really investing in hard assets that the young people will benefit from. That's the problem. It's just going to be spent on daily needs for people rather than assets, interstates, infrastructure that we could. At least they could say, well, I'm in
to be in agreement that they'll spend money they don't have.
Yeah, I think the caller's point was so well made. The Republicans don't get a pass on not contributing to the debt. I mean, we've seen in the General Assembly, in the Senate, and the House, there are folks that are Republicans. That doesn't mean they're fiscal conservative. Two very different things at times. And I think what's important to recognize is that, especially under the Obama administration, and then Biden has continued that, there's a narrative that is kind of preached from the executive branch that the government can fix your problems. If we spend enough, we can fix it. And while, certainly Trump had his issues and his challenges, I think what Trump and that administration tended to lean toward is that government is not the answer to all your problems. Where's the personal accountability? Like, where is you, man, you, woman, you, family, your role in that? So it's not to say, again, one is all bad in terms of you don't need any government. You've said it so many times before. You need roads. You need government's involvement. But if government is being asked to fix all of our problems, you're implicitly giving them a blank check. And all that means is more spending.
Well said. Let's go to the phone. Someone else is there.
Our next caller is Ashley in Poston's Corner. Ashley, you're on with the delegation.
Good morning, fellas. I will say kind of what the last caller was saying. What do you do if you find yourself in a pyramid scheme at the tail end of it? And for people my age, 43 and younger, people my age, we are in a pyramid scheme, but at the tail end of it, there's probably a chance that I'll never see Social Security ever, between raising of the ages and it not being funded as well. What does the government do when people my age and younger just refuse to participate? And I'll take it out there.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate that. I don't have the answer to that. I don't think you have a choice right now to participate or not. I mean, obviously, we're living in a very chaotic age in American government. We live in a, and I've made this prediction, not to be provocative, but I really believe that you'll see more and more civil disobedience. I think civil disobedience will be normalized. I think people will refuse to do what it is the government says do. Now, I'm talking about this is generational. This isn't from February to June of this year. I mean, I'm talking about long term. And I think once I read a lot of polling, and once the people lose faith in their government, they begin to be more motivated to resist whatever it is the government says do. But that's kind of a macro debate and less of a kind of a micro. I'm going to go to Representative Lowe, if you don't mind, Phillip. You guys don't fund Medicare. You don't fund Social Security, but there's a state pension plan that we have to fund, and it is a huge burden on the amount of the restrictive nature of which you can do other things because you have to commit to those commitments we've already made.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. You know, our state, back in the days when the Democrats ran it, then they gave out these benefits, and these benefits packages were more than we can afford to keep paying. And we're okay with it, but we have a lot of debt in the pension. We're not about to go broke with it. But I think we should throw some money at it to help fight it and beat it back down. But we need to stop doing what we're doing. We need to get into defined benefit plans with people, let them put their money in and let them invest it and take over, their responsibility instead of having a government pension continue on and on down this road. I don't know why we keep kicking it.
But Phillip, as a conservative Republican, what can you do in regards to some of the promises made of more liberal lawmakers before you?
Well, certainly there's nothing you can do about something short of going bankrupt and saying, hey, help courts, you take this over. We're not anywhere near that with our pension, but it's unsustainable, and we know it, and we've got to change it. And why we don't switch, I don't know. That'd be the vote I would take. Let's switch. But I think they've worried that it would crash if they did that.
And Mike, you're kind of the new guy on the block, so to speak, but you've studied and tried to better understand, asked a lot of questions of people who are in the know. What can a conservative Republican such as you and Phillip do to change the mindset of state government? That's a weird way to ask it, but there is a certain mindset of government. It's different than the private sector. Both of you guys in the private sector, you know how that works. Government works fundamentally different than that. But what can you do to help change the mindset of government?
Yeah, especially regarding the unfunded pension liability, not making it worse has got to be the first thing we do. Don't compile it. And to Phillip's point, let's see if there's a better way to do it. But in terms of overall spending, I think that's why the General Assembly, of the 170 members in there, 46 senators, 124 state reps, we need more business owners, business people who understand how a P&L works, how a balance sheet works, how truly to make payroll. And most importantly, Ken, when we've got a year like even this year and last year, when we have excess funds, I don't know how many we're going to have, 4 billion, 5 billion, whatever our excess or our surplus money is going to be, just like we teach our children or our employees that if you keep money in your working capital account, you got a really good chance of spending it at some point. Give the money back to the taxpayers. Government's got a great way of finding ways to spend money. Give it back to the taxpayers and let them use their money. And I think you're going to find that we found over and over again with the American spirit and the South Carolina spirit, individuals are better with their money than the government is.
Phillip, a lot of this happens because Republicans can't, they eat themselves. They eat their own. They destroy from within. We talked abortion, and you couldn't say yes for an answer. Not the two of you, but the party in general. I've used this linear graph as an example. I want to get both of your takes on this. So on one end is the most libertarian-leaning Republican imaginable. They want to drown government in a bathtub. They're borderline anarchist. I can get there. I'll be honest with you. At times in my life, I kind of get over there, and I know you do as well, Phillip. But there's a responsibility the party has to kind of find consensus and build a governing agenda. How hard is that today as a Republican?
I think the larger the Republicans are in the state, the percentage of legislators that are Republican, you're going to have a larger group at the left and the right end of the spectrum. If it's a bell-shaped curve, you're going to have people in around Charleston that are going to be your real moderate Republicans. You're going to have some people in the upstate that are going to be closer to the libertarian wing. And so, they'll make some noise on both ends. And policy somewhere generally sets where about 80 to 90% of the Republican caucus can get around a concept and an idea and support it. And that's kind of how we use our caucus to move major bills forward for us.
And Mike, it's not a monarchy or a dictatorship. I mean, there has to be some resolve within to, as Phillip said, and if you're a Republican and a conservative Republican in particular, and you utter the word compromise, it makes you nervous. I mean, it really does. I've been there, done that. I mean, I know as somebody running for office, and I say the word compromise, I'm like, wow, should I have said that or not? But it is necessary to build some sort of consensus and governing agenda.
It is, and that adage we've all heard about, don't let perfect get in the way of good, is an adage that is tough for a lawmaker who oftentimes they come from their own district or their own environment where they lead the show, whether that be in their own business or their own entity there, and they get to a body of 46 or 124, and they realize they can't have it just their way. So when you brought up such great examples with the abortion bill, or finally the school choice bill that we just finally voted on this year that we didn't get out last year, so we got it out this year. But there were those that said, I want it my way, and not maybe, I want it all my way. And you realize you're not on an island. You can't make it work that way. That's why civil discourse. I talk to a lot of young people, telling and explaining to these young people the importance of civil discourse, of understanding to listen much more than you talk, to realize that you don't get to make all the decisions yourself. It's not a monarchy there. It's going to be so important for the next generation who's going to need to work together.
Well, explain. Let's take a break. We'll be back in just a few minutes. And then there was one.
Scared them off.
Yeah, Phillip Lowe had to leave. He had Phillip runs a business, and he has to go to work. He has to go do his job, believe it or not. Citizen legislator personified is that. We can all relate to that. As a former politician who ran a business, Mike's politician runs a business, Phillip, politician, runs a business. It gets complicated. It gets very complicated in trying to delegate and prioritize your time.
A lot of balancing going on. I'll get a call in my Senate office, and I was just checking to see what's the price on a rear-end differential. And I was like, okay, wrong phone number there.
There you go. Yeah, I remember somebody called the lieutenant governor's office one day and said, that 16-foot flatbed you put on my truck in 2007 leaking oil bad.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, bring it up here, and we'll get somebody on staff to work on it. Mike, you mentioned education a second ago. We had a couple of callers earlier this week complain respectfully about our inability to do what it seems Florida and Ron DeSantis are able to do. And I'm talking about parental awareness and involvement and empowerment. Where are you, and where do you think we are as a state on parents being empowered about what sorts of teachers, what sorts of curriculum? Is that a fair criticism for parents to say, I want to know more about my child's education?
And I think not only is it a fair criticism, I think it's an imperative right now. There is such a liberal, woke shift going on in education, both higher education and even in K through 12 in many school districts, that parents, if they're not involved, they're going to wake up and realize that their kids have been taught things that they have no business being taught, things that are absolutely not age appropriate. What I'd like to say, there's a way to stick a finger in the dike, so to speak, and stop the water from coming through the dam. I'm glad we passed the school choice bill, the parental choice bill this past week. It is in no way meant to hurt public schools. I went every day of my life to public schools, and I wouldn't have traded. It was a great experience. My dad was a public school teacher, but the public schools of today are very different than they were years ago. So parents should have the choice to decide what's best for their children. And if that's the public school, then so be it. If that's a Christian school, so be it. And if they've paid the tax dollars into the system, they should have that parental choice. So we were able to finally pass that out yesterday, as a matter of fact, over into the House.
Is it fair to say that a lot of what DeSantis did is because he could? The governor of Florida is a more, we talk about the weak office that is the South Carolina governorship. DeSantis has a little more authority down there. But what do you feel, I guess what I'm asking is, as a member of the South Carolina State Senate, what is your obligation to work with the chief executive officer, the governor of our state?
Yeah, great question. When the governor did his State of the State address this past week, a week before this last, the General Assembly, we were all there, and he made a lot of commitments. When you're in the system, as I am now and you were then, you realize that he can espouse a lot of things and he can suggest a lot of things, but it's going to have to be with the cooperation and collaboration of the General Assembly. So I love the fact that the governor lays out an agenda of what's important to him, and ultimately he can sign a bill or he can veto a bill and he can apply public pressure, but we are a General Assembly run state. So the constant meetings, and I was real honored. The governor, he had created a task force of 10 of us for judicial reform and bond reform, and he selected me on that just because I've been very vocal about the need for judicial reform. And in that meeting with the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader, we had an opportunity to really talk about, will the governor support it publicly? Because he does have a very big pulpit, very big microphone, and he can apply pressure where it needs to be applied, but we've got to have the courage to make the right laws.
Rev, do we have a call? Let's go to the phone.
Daphne and Dylan, you are on with Senator Reichenbach.
Good morning, Senator Reichenbach.
Good morning.
One of my passions is our children being targeted by the radical left to do and believe things that are perverted, and no one seems to be able to protect them. When our school system, and they targeted the children very early on, and now they've gone to the extreme where they can show them pornography, teach them how to do sexual acts. And I recently learned about the clinic in Charleston, which I was glad the lady called after I did, who said that the 4 and the 5-year-olds were being their sex change enacted in a clinic in Charleston. And I was pleased that the legislators were going to defund any state monies going to that. So those young, vulnerable, innocent children are the ones that are being targeted. Also, I heard Ken's thing about Social Security and whatnot. Don't fall into the trap that the Democrats are setting for you, because Schumer and all the rest of the Washington cabal are hollering they're going to cut out your Medicare and your Social Security. The response to that should be, no, what we want to do is stop Joe and the Democrats from bringing in 4 million illegals, handing them an EBT card, a Medicaid card, and a cell phone, giving them free housing and giving them better treatment than our citizens who have worked all their lives. That should be the response.
Thank you, Daphne. Appreciate that. Mike, I'll let you address the report about the local issue, and then I'll kind of I get what Daphne's saying about don't take debate, don't fall into the trap. It's not a trap. We got to deal with Social Security and Medicare. We got to reform that in some way, shape, or form. And it's not as simple as people are living much longer, but it kind of is as simple as people are living much longer, and the expense incurred and the longevity of life is unsustainable. It's not that simple, but that's the sound bite. Mike, I'll defer to you on the other.
Yeah, Daphne, thank you for calling. And this is almost, as I see it, Daphne, and your point's so well made, it's a twofold approach. It's going to take people being engaged and involved, people like you, groups like Moms for Liberty, Angela Cooper, who's locally the chapter chair, and all those wonderful women and men in Moms for Liberty who are fighting for the correct conservative school board seats and school administrators to speak up and have a voice be heard. But parents also need to speak up. Parents need to look at what their kids are being taught, what's coming home in the books, having those conversations at dinner. I know it sounds old Norman Rockwell, but having dinners with your families and your kids to hear what's going on at school. Tell me what you learned today. Tell me what your teacher's saying. Tell me what's going on. The second part of it is, in addition to being an informed and engaged parent and community activist like you and Moms for Liberty, and I don't want to over-spiritualize it, but Daphne, we also need to pray. This is a spiritual battle. And if you spend any time in the Bible, and I don't spend nearly enough, but those who do realize that there are battles that are fought in the heavens that before they even are manifested in the earth. There is a battle over our young people. It's a perversion to teach them ways to distract them from the truth. And if we pray for transparency and for revelation and for God's wisdom and for us to then have the courage to make the right moves, to remove the school board that need to be, to remove the administrators, to remove the teachers, like metaphorically, to go to war when necessary to fight for our kids, we can have God's wisdom to do it. But man, David didn't go fight Goliath without going to God first and being like, God, he's an enemy of yours. This is an enemy of our people and an enemy of our young people.
Mike, let me ask you this. So you have a worldview, you have a biblical worldview. How do you deal personally with those who don't? In my time, I don't have to do it now. I mean, I don't. I'm an opinion monster. I give opinions. People have opinions of my opinions, and we debate those. But you have a responsibility to the state of South Carolina as a member of its General Assembly. You have a biblical worldview. Some South Carolinians don't have that biblical worldview. How do you address the contrast, the difference in your belief system and theirs?
Yeah, you've asked a lot of good questions over your years on the show, Ken. That's probably one of the most in-depth and involved and important question, because you're exactly right. There's 170 legislators, and I have 45 other senators within our 46-member body. And not all of us have the same faith or the same degree of faith. That's where I've realized you can't out-logic someone in this situation. You can't outsmart them. You can't have a better oratorical argument when you go to the well. Yes, you have to know your facts. You have to study. You have to know the nuance of a bill. But I firmly believe that the only possible way to be effective in moving forward when there is a spiritual battle is through prayer, is through saying, God, like, this is your battle to fight. Like, even, again, I going back into the best reference I know, even in biblical terms, even when Saul lost his mind and was trying to kill David, the man after God's own heart, David, who had an opportunity to kill Saul, didn't take his life. He's like, no, God, you put him here. Don't know why, but you put him here for a reason. And that's seen time and time again biblically, that for whatever the reason, when these people are in leadership, even biblical times, God has them there for a reason and he'll use them. I got to pray the same thing. God, help me figure out how to work with this senator, with this legislator, with this department head to accomplish your goals, and give me the wisdom to say the right things, to have the spirit of cooperation, because on my own, I can't do it. Your point's so well made.
Well explained. We'll take a break. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Eight 843-661-0937. Yours truly and Senator Mike Reichenbach having a very philosophical and in-depth conversation about, and it really matters, guys. I mean, when you make a political decision, I mean, there's kind of a combination of your genetic hardwiring in compliance with your value system. And I've always said, my genetic hardwiring says X, but my biblical worldview says Y. How do I end up at Y, or do I end up at X, or how do I self-compromise or self-introspectively evaluate what is the right and sincere thing to do? Let's go to the phone. Someone's there.
Carol in Marion, you are on with Senator Reichenbach.
Good morning, gentlemen. I want to touch upon the education aspect of this conversation. I taught in Timmonsville about 15 years ago. It was just for 1 year. It was my first year of teaching, but I came from New Jersey and their education system. And while I was teaching, I looked at I compared the standards for New Jersey elementary school students compared to second grade in South Carolina. And I discovered that the second grade standards in South Carolina were more on par with fourth grade New Jersey standards. Now, it's all well and good to want to have high standards, but those standards are way too high for the students of South Carolina. And people don't want to hear we need to lower the standards, but we need to lower the standards so that those children, so we can stop having such high dropout rates. If a child feels like they can't reach those standards, they're going to just give up. But if they're just high enough that they're challenging, but they're attainable, they'll keep persisting.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate that. Mike, I'll let you chew on that for a second.
Carol, I guess to make sure I understand your question, are you kind of saying like if you set the bar too high, they'll be disincentivized or demotivated to try to attain the bar?
Yes.
Okay. You know, I'm not an educator, but I can certainly understand that. If as a fourth grader, I'm expected to perform at a seventh grade level, and there's very little chance to get there unless I'm exceptional, or a second grader to a fifth grade level, whatever the example might be, I can certainly appreciate how a stretch goal is great, but an unattainable goal does nothing but disincentivize.
Who gets to decide what the level of performance or proficiency a seventh grader should attain?
Yeah, is that school board, Carol? Do you know, is that a superintendent? Like, who makes those decisions?
I am not sure. I do know that I know in Marion County, my children go to my youngest goes to Marion County Public Schools. My oldest two go to a Christian school. My youngest is in kindergarten, and his teacher, who I don't think the teachers have any say about it, teacher has said that the kindergartners in general education, they don't like that the kindergartners don't really have any playtime. It's all, strict, I can't think of the word, disciplined and academic. And they're learning stuff like vertices in math. Kindergartners, 5-year-olds are learning about vertices. And that's not something that I learned, and I know this is years and years ago, but that's not something I learned until middle school, and they're teaching it to kindergartners. So I know it's not the teachers that come up with these standards. And I'm not sure it's the school board either.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thank you, Carl. I want to jump in here. I'm not, and I'll ask it another way. I'll be a radio show host for a second. Is it encouraging or not that we're having some pretty controversial discussions about public education?
I think it's the few things would be more appropriate to have robust, controversial conversations about. It's our kids. There's a battle over our kids, and if we don't figure this out now, we're going to raise a generation that has lost their way even more than we're seeing right now. I love Carol's question. I'm not sure if Dr. O'Malley or Dr. Vincent down in Hannah Pamplico or Alana Prosser or Dr. Hickson, any of the 4 superintendents of Florence school districts are listed in. I'd love for maybe one of them to either call in or text me, because I am quite curious, to Carol's point, who makes the decision as far as where the benchmark is set?
Because you want kids to strive to succeed at the highest degree possible. You want a kid to maximize their potential. But if you give them goals or objectives that are unattainable, it could de-incentivize it could demoralize a kid and a family.
Yeah, and actually, Dr. O'Malley, he texted me and he said that I guess he said I presume that would mean the General Assembly, we set the curriculum. I presume that's either the General Assemblies, maybe the education committees, or could it be the Superintendent of Education, which would have been Molly Spearman or Ellen Weaver. Yep. So that's a good question, Carol. I could certainly see your point. That we need to be reasonable.
And we may try to get Rich to come on here and address some of this concern specifically. The one thing I found about Dr. O'Malley, he's not afraid of controversial questions in education, and I think we all benefit from that reality. Let's go to the phone. Someone's there?
Brent in Florence, you're on with Senator Reichenbach.
Hey, Mike, how are you? It's Brent Tiller.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, got a question. I asked the guys last week some huge disruptors with school choice, but how does school choice increase participation to the parents that aren't participating now? Because, my wife works in public education. We've got the ear, and we mentor some people in the school district. How does school choice, how does that affect those parents that don't participate now, which is the problem? These kids aren't going to school. We've got so many, they're falling behind. And if you look at their records, it's because they attend school 1 or 2 days a week. They're not participating. The parents aren't helping. So I see the good and the bad with school choice. I talked last week, what happens to the private school that's Christian that makes you sign a clause or a creed that you're going to be a believer? And are they going to y'all going to allow them to turn that child away because their parents are not of the Christian faith that school deems to be their guiding model? Because Christian education, I went to a Christian school a few years. It's based on Christian faith, so you have to make an A in your Christian classes. So those two things: how does school choice help participation, and those ones aren't participating now? And then what's the fallback to what could be the fallback? I've asked Jay. We're friends. If you send money to a private school, when does the state step in and say you have to do this? Are all teachers going to have to be certified now? Because I hear that a lot. A lot of teachers, don't have to have certain certifications in private school, but Dr. O'Malley wants every teacher certified. Maybe have to be in Florence one. So those are some of my questions about school choice.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate it. Got about a minute, Mike.
Yeah, great question. First of all, real quick, Superintendent or O'Malley just texted in again. He said it's the State Board of Education approved, to the earlier point, State Board of Education approves the curriculum and the standards, and then the state funds the books to teach the curriculum, that the local superintendents or the local school districts don't have a choice. So in answer to that question, it would be the State Board of Education sets the curriculum or approves the curriculum and the standards, and then the state General Assembly, we would fund the books to achieve that curriculum. In answer to your question, that's what Rich says. In answer to your question, Brent, so the school choice bill that we passed out, it's called ESA, Educational Savings Account, and what that allows parents to do who, theoretically, you and your wife, you've paid into the system, you're at either 100, 200, 300, or 400% of the poverty level is the first group. You're able to take the funds that you have paid into the system and then choose to say, I want my child to have a Christian education. Now, you don't get to tell the school, let's say a Christian school, well, you have a Christian curriculum. You want our kids to go to chapel. I refuse for my child to go to chapel.
Hold on to that for a second. Can you hang around one more segment?
Sure.
Okay, hard break, top of the hour. Can't float this back.
Yep.
Okay, Mike, I got to warn you. This happens every morning at 9 o'clock. You're here only on Fridays, and you're normally gone by now. Mike Reichenbach, Senator Reichenbach, has agreed to stay with us for a bit longer because I didn't want him to rush that answer. That's a serious topic. I didn't want to have to rush an answer, and we're trying to get in under the wire. But at 9, I drink a Celsius.
Watch out.
And a Celsius is I don't know any other way to say it. It's a healthy energy drink. And it's healthy and it's energetic. So Rev laughs at me because I go off the charts.
You might start talking a little faster.
I mean, just forgive the jumping jacks and the push-ups and sit-ups and all these other sorts of things.
Ken's looking like a spider monkey on crack over here.
It's the Arctic Vibe Celsius today, and it's the absolute healthiest energy drink on the market today, and it's marketed by our good friends and partners at Pepsi, Florence. So if I get a little out of control, forgive me. Thanks to Rich O'Malley for calling in and going on speakerphone with Mike and I to explain some of his criticism and complaint about the way we run the education system in South Carolina. Mike and I were talking a second ago about Brent's question and comments, and I'm going to be radio show host for a second. Respect the senator here, but he's not bothered by this. There is a belief out there amongst public educators that moms are trying to convince people like you, Senator Reichenbach, that schools have become so radicalized and left-leaning and gender mutilation and sex change and, political orientation debates and whatnot, that they can figure out a way to get that money in their pockets so they can go to a private school and not have to pony up for the amount. And, I mean, you're nodding your head. I mean, the human condition is the human condition. It's been around since the beginning of time. What did Eve do? I mean, and then Adam said, well, I guess I'm with her, So the human condition ain't a new phenomenon. It's always been there. And self-preservation is a priority of all of ours. I mean, it really and truly is. So when we have these debates, these complicated matters before the public, Rich O'Malley doesn't have all the answers. Mike Reichenbach doesn't have all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers. Brent doesn't have all the answers. But the more honest, serious conversations we have, the better the answers become. Is that fair?
It is fair. And you don't need any more accolades, especially when you're on your Celsius Arctic vibe.
I thought you might Reichenbach.
Like a spider monkey on crack, baby. But what you and Dave do here means so much. It creates the avenue for these conversations, and these are important conversations. These conversations shouldn't be just held in the General Assembly or in living rooms. It needs to be held at a larger forum. So, Brent, to your question, and I'm glad we were able to take this up again, and I'll stay. Yeah, I told you this before, Ken. People calling in is the greatest thing that can happen because it creates the dialogue. I'll stay all day for that matter. Until Sharice tells me I got to come home. But
I ain't. I'm leaving at 10.
But what I hear time and time again from constituents that are an advocate of parental choice, they say, I've paid into the system. I pay my taxes. I work hard. There was a time when I had confidence in public schools, and many do. Some still do. Most still do. Again, I went every day of my life to public schools. But there are those that say, my fifth grader came home and was explained to them by their teacher what masturbation is. Or this teacher told my third grader to call this other student they or them. Now, you can agree, you can disagree, but if you don't want ideological doctrine taught to your kids, but you've paid into the system, parents often over and over take the position, I should have the right to say, I want the dollars that I've spent to follow my child to a school that I do have confidence in. Nobody gets to teach my child about masturbation until I feel they're ready, or what pornography is, or what gender pronouns is, or what fill in the blank. Some may call it radical. I call it radical left wokeism. Others would say it's just the new culture. We're enlightened now. Doesn't matter where you fall on it, they're your kids. And I don't think the government or a teacher or a school administration gets to say, no, we think your third grader should understand what masturbation is because we deem appropriate. That's what my constituents say, fight for that. I'm going to fight for it. Now, it's not a perfect system. And the bill, Brent, to your point, the ESA bill that we passed out is in no way a perfect system. It takes up to about 15,000 families who are up to 400% of the poverty level. So it starts with the first group is the first group that can least afford it, and it gives them an allocation of $6,000 a year. Many will say $6,000 a year isn't nearly enough to go to most private schools. And in most cases, you're right. So then it comes down to, can families prioritize their budgets to make up the difference? Will schools help make that up? Will there be any private charitable organizations? Big conversation to be had, but it's the first step to allowing parents to say, I want something different for my child. And I believe it was you, Brent, or someone else who brought up about on the Christian school, for instance. What if you want to send your child to a Christian school, but they don't believe in that faith and they don't want to go to chapel and they don't want to pray? Well, that's your right to say, my child's not going to do that thing, but then don't send your kid to that school because that's that school's curriculum. It's advertised, it's known, it's widely displayed what their curriculum is. So there's going to be some tension, and sometimes we get better. Oftentimes, I would say most times, we as people get better in the tension, in those conversations of saying, here's what I think's best, but here's what you think's best.
Well, explain. Let's go to the phone. Someone's there.
Angela in Pamplico, you're on with Senator Reichenbach.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Okay, so a few things. Parental involvement. So somebody called and, was saying, how do we get parents, how do we get parents involved that aren't involved now just because of school choice? We don't. That's not what school choice is about. And I think it's getting lost. The way we get school choice, the way we get parents involved with school choice and without school choice is through community. We've got to come together as a community, and we've got to inspire parents, our neighbors, our family, everybody. We've got to inspire each other to get involved. And we do that through community, coming together and really building those relationships with each other, cross community lines, not just, this neighborhood and that neighborhood, but as a whole, as a town, as a county, we've got to all come together and inspire each other and, look after each other's kids like we did when I was growing up. The neighborhood took care of all kids. It wasn't just, that's my kid, and you don't, tell them what to do. That's how we get parental involvement, no matter what the school choice issue is. And then second of all, I think one thing that's getting lost with the school choice is this isn't a school choice necessarily between public school versus private school versus homeschool versus whatever else. It also is school choice between public schools. If you don't want your child to go to private school, don't send them to private school, because there are a lot of private schools here lately, I'm finding, that are indoctrinating our children too. So private school is not the answer to everything. But if I live in the West Florence side of town and I want my child to go to South Florence because, maybe athletics, because there might be a class that South Florence offers that West Florence doesn't, vice versa, then I have that choice.
Thank you, Angela. Appreciate that. Well, and I believe this, Mike, and this, I'll use my personal example. I got a good friend of mine, as big a Clemson fan as you'd ever meet in your life. Loved the Tigers, grew up a Tiger, grandfather was a Tiger, kids go to Clemson games. The son wanted to be a business person. They had to make a decision that the Dartmoor School of Business was one of the best rated business schools in America. And I watched that family struggle with that decision. But they made that decision based on what? Choice, personal choice. They still wear Ipte clothes. They still love the Tigers. But they made a decision that they felt was in that kid's best interest to put him in a better than average business school. Families in public education deserve that sort of right to make a decision. Is that fair?
I fully agree. And Angela, I really appreciate you calling in and all you do for Moms for Liberty. But I like your last point is exactly, it's not just from public school to private school. There can be a lot of other considerations. Athletics is a big one. I was not a great athlete. I loved sports, but I was not a great athlete. I wouldn't even have been on the team at South or West or Wilson. I'd like to think I could have at least been a part of a team of Hannah Pamplico or Johnsonville, because there's a much smaller pool of players. Now they've got great athletics. But when you got 60 in a graduating class versus 360, you got a much better chance of being on a team. But you learn a lot from being on a team, from sports, from practices, about what it's like to not give up even when you're tired. So I have no doubt that my mom or my dad would have figured out a way to try to get me to a Red Raider or a Golden Flashes or a school like that, because I couldn't have been a Tiger or a Bruin or a Knight. A lot of considerations. It's about parental choice to choose what's best for your kids.
Well, and when you look at the top down, I think conservatives in general believe the old Jefferson philosophy, best government's government closest to the people. I've heard Dr. O'Malley express his concern about South Carolina in particular being a kind of a top-down system. In other words, the curriculum is set at the state level. The standards are set at the state level. Local autonomy is different in South Carolina than it is from some of the other states that perform above average. But then the problem becomes, Mike, and I'll get your take on this. Let's, for argument's sake, say that we disband the Department of Education in South Carolina, that the superintendent of education is somewhat neutered in their ability to work with the Board of Education to demand or command curriculum and standards. All of a sudden, that responsibility is in the hand of a local school board, local superintendent, local principal. How do we hold them accountable? But because you've got a lot more organizations. In other words, if the standards aren't met and the curriculum is invalid or as it should not be, you know exactly where to go look now. The superintendent of education, the Board of Education, and the General Assembly. All of a sudden, we allow that responsibility to be taken on at the local level, but there has to be some accountability at the local level. That's a complicated process. In theory, it makes a lot of sense. You pass the right to standard and curriculum to the local level, but what if the local level isn't up to the task? Then we've got this readdressing that must take place.
I remember when I watched Talladega Nights, Cal Naughton, Ricky Bobby's best friend, says he's got a pretzel in his head. That's a pretzel in the head kind of question right there, because getting that right, there's very little margin for error. You're talking about kids' lives. It would almost be interesting. I don't want to put people out there, but to have Dr. O'Malley and Dr. Neil Vincent from Hannah Pamplico and Alana Prosser from from Johnsonville and Dr. Hickson from Lake City to come on or to call in and talk about, as the four superintendents of Florence County schools or Florence school districts, how could we do that? What would the school boards and what would the superintendents agree to make sure that no child in any particular district falls behind? Because I don't know the answer to that. If it's truly home rule and each district gets to decide, how do you ensure standards are being met? Because some could be great and some could be not so great.
Sure, you got competent people in government, you got incompetent people in government, just as in the private sector.
That's
It's no
exactly
different
right.
than the private sector. Do we have a call, Ref? Let's go to the phone.
Bill in Sumter, listening to WDXY. You are on with Senator Reichenbach.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. Hey, so Ken, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what you just said. You kind of stole a little of my thunder. My question is, as my wife and I are dual income and we have no children. So my question is how is there any possible way, other than what we already do through charities, is there any possible way that, like, I could say allocate this money out of my taxes, you know, that goes to the school system, you know, instead of sending it to this great big pool, send it to X, Y, and Z districts or what there may be, or, you know, is there any possible way that could be, like, I don't know, maybe suggested, or I don't know that could be implemented, or is that going to be too Herculean of a effort?
Bill, that's a great idea. There's an amendment, actually a new bill coming up. It's going to be called PACE. And Senator Tom Davis out of Beaufort County is a big proponent of the PACE amendment or the PACE bill. And what PACE would do, it would allow someone exactly like you, who maybe doesn't have kids or their kids are already grown, who want to involve themselves as from a standpoint of financial involvement in schools to make it better, but they also want the benefit from it. So what PACE would allow you to do as a private individual or private business, you would have a scholarship organization in your area. You would give them, give an example, $5,000 that they could use for scholarships for families to send their children to other schools, whether it be other private schools or other public schools. And then what you would be able to do, you as the giver, the contributor, would receive a tax credit, a state income tax credit for that amount. That's not a deduction. That's an actual dollar for dollar credit. So the motivation for you would be you get a tax credit, which would be phenomenal, but then you also are allowing other students who may need the means to use those dollars to have a school of their choice.
That's a very interesting answer. Thank you. Appreciate the call there. We don't have another call, do we? And we're rolling here. I mean, you know, and once again, Mike normally leaves at 9, and Phillip and Jay are normally here, but this topic is very near and dear to people. So, and I'll tell you the reason it's going to be a central issue in the next 2 years of American politics. If Ron DeSantis decides to run for president, DeSantis is going to make as one of his, priorities, or he will list his accomplishments of getting reelected as a swing state by an overwhelming margin. I mean, that will be his claim to fame, so to speak. I'm electable. I'm more electable than anybody because Florida's not competitive anymore. We did some cool things there. But he's become known as the education governor. Parental empowerment, parental awareness. If a teacher is teaching certain curriculum or has an agenda other than, you know, the kid's best interests, DeSantis is going to root that out at the executive level. And education will be a focal point in the next presidential election. I don't think Mike Reichenbach, no, I don't want education to be federalized. I mean, I certainly don't have any interest in that. And I like the idea of, you know, the local school board, the local superintendent, the local parents being empowered as to what sort of curriculum and standard their kids have to attain. But if you're going to ask Senator Reichenbach to fund education at the level that many are requesting it, who's held accountable? And how do we hold that person accountable when we find out a school has not met the standard, has gotten a little loose and fast with the curriculum? What do? Bring them to the Senate and ask them to appear before a subcommittee? You see where I'm headed?
Yeah.
A lot of these things are soundbitey in nature. And Mike's finding this out. He already knew this, but he's really living it now. There are a lot of things that run through your head that make a lot of sense until you accept the fact that you're part of a political body that has a lot of different perspectives and views.
Yeah, I think that's one reason why attending school board meetings, even if you can't attend in person, watching them online and having input is perhaps one of the most critical aspects that a family or a parent or even an adult who doesn't have children can do. Because whether you have kids or not, or whether your kids are grown, the children that are being educated and raised in your community are going to set the tone and the foundation for your workforce, for your consumer base, for your crime, your lack thereof, your first responders.
we all are going to need them. So being engaged and informed at this level is critical. It's not to say the city council's not, or the county council, or the General Assembly, but please don't forget the school board and the importance of it. These kind of conversations have got to happen. They need to continue.
Well explained. Appreciate you hanging around for an extra segment.
Always.
Rev, he gets overtime pay this week.
Okay.
Not only did he stay longer, I'm drinking Celsius. He's a little bit nervous in the way I'm jumping around.
Give him one of those Celsius.
Yeah, there you go.
There's your extra pay.
He won't drive home. He'll run home.
Everybody, please pray for Callie. Pray for her and her family.
Right.
Amen.
For peace and strength.
Amen. And not only pray, let's do this as well. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Callie Weatherford and her family are dealing with something none of us wish we. It's it's humanly impossible for me to even consider what the family's going through. But the little girl and her family are dealing with an aggressive brain tumor located on her 5-year-old brainstem. We're having a benefit to try and raise money, $10 per plate, chicken bog, barbecue. If you get 10 plates or more, they'll deliver. I'll give you 2 names and numbers, and I'll plead with you to please reach out to these 2 people and ask how you can help. Trip Moore, 843-687-9289. Will Robinson, 843-468-1125. I can't cure cancer. I have no idea what to do about a brain tumor, but I got $10,
right.
$20, $30, and I can help that family keep the train on the track as well as they can during this very unfortunate time. So, yeah, prayers, as Mike said, but also let's financially support this family to the best of our abilities. Take a break. Back in a few.